best statistic out of last night is that Queensland has an undefeated track record at Gold Coast for Origin games. So look forward.
Did anybody get $50 out of the mare?
No, I didn't bet.
Didn't see the mare. No. All right, councillors, we've got a number of start items this morning. Well, firstly, is there any conflict of interest declarations that are upcoming for today's meeting? Councillor Gates, did you want to raise?
Chairman, I've had advice from the city solicitor that it's not necessary. I was going to declare a conflict with Forgan Smith Architects from a part-time job 30 years ago. City solicitor has advised that's not necessary.
Thank you. So I think we'll just apply a star to item 1 being the confirmation of the previous minutes. We've then got a number of starred items. Did anyone want to unstar items? Councillor Barton-Lumsden?
Just item 5, Chair.
5. Councillor 3. Sorry, and I should also welcome Councillor Barton-Lumsden and Councillor Patterson this morning. Councillor Taylor, are you visiting? You're visiting. Welcome. Councillor Owen Jones. Oh, and Councillor McDonald. Sorry, you've become such a regular attendee, I thought you remember. Councillor Owen Jones.
7 and 8, please.
Okay, so that leaves start items remaining of 1, 4. Oh, sorry, we need to unstar 4. 1, 6, 9. Councillor Pauline Young, you need to make a declaration on 9, or where are we up to with that?
I've made it several times and I'll just be leaving the room.
Okay, well, we'll unstar that. Okay, so 1 and 6. Someone like to move the start items? Councillor Gates seconded. Councillor Patterson, despite your enthusiasm, you can't move it. Councillor Gates and Councillor Owen Jones. All in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, councillors, item 3.
Established 4 multiple dwellings at 26 Merlon Crescent in Palm Beach. The subject site consists of a single allotment and it's located on the southern side of Merlon Crescent. The site currently contains a dwelling house and the surrounding character is generally a residential with dwelling houses, multiple dwellings. The site's located within the medium density residential zone, which extends along Merlon Crescent and also to the south. Immediately on the northern side of Merlon Crescent is Merlon Park in the open space zone, which is also adjacent to Tullabudgera Creek. The site's identified as having a building height overlay of 3 stories and 15 metres. The development was originally lodged as being 4 stories. However, just after lodgement, the city increased the flood heights, which resulted in the ground floor of the development being raised because of basement to meet the DFL, the amended DFL. And this resulted in a small portion of the basement being above 1 metre, being more than 1 metre above the natural ground level. Therefore, it's being defined as a story. The extent of the non-compliance is shown in this figure, that yellow bit, and so the largest part of the non-compliance is 30 centimetres. So it's technically defined as a 5-storey building. However, it does generally maintain the appearance of 4 stories. And being within a 3-storey area, it's impact accessible. So as I'd said, despite the non-compliance, it still maintains the appearance of a 4-storey building, and it's been assessed on that basis. However, we have acknowledged the non-compliance with the framework. The development provides car parking within the semi-basement level and provides 1 unit per floor above that. A small rooftop area has been provided as well, which serves as communal open space. However, no rooftops, there's no roofs on there, so it's therefore not defined as a story. Overall, the officers assessed the development and considered it complied with the relevant provisions of the city plan, with the exception being it protrudes above 50%, which is listed within the strategic framework. In this regard, officers considered that there were other relevant matters to the application, as the increase in building height beyond the 50% provision was a result of the increased flood heights, and as such, officers have recommended that the application be approved subject to conditions.
Okay, thank you. So just turning to that picture on page 143, which I think is probably the best illustration of this little extent of non-compliance. How...
Is that there?
Have you got one of those? Yeah. So the top one of those two shows the cross section of the property. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right, yeah. So that's the basement level.
At the street level, I presume, to the left, it's at its greatest, which is about 30 centimetres?
Yeah, so at its greatest, which is shown in that bottom figure.
Right.
And yeah, that's looking from the street level, so it's 30 centimetres is the maximum. And
so then by the time you get to that lift well and stairs, like what's the like measurement at that point?
They haven't given us the actual measurement, but it's probably about
negligible.
100 millimetres, about that.
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. Just through you, I have a question just about the flood heights. I understand we've adopted them, but are they locked in and are they deemed to be correct in terms of our flood modelling at this point in time?
Through you, Chair. I don't know about the actual specific modelling of it, but it was adopted in the previous versions of the city plan. So it was in the end of 2018 that the amended flood heights were adopted.
Is there anyone from hydraulics here this morning? Because I don't know why in my mind I have a query about the flood heights across the city and how we have interpreted them.
Through the chair, the flood heights are correct. So Nathan was correct in saying that the flood heights did change in September 2018.
So there's no likelihood of a change to our city plan as a result of additional modelling at the moment.
So, sorry, Sam, I'll take that through you, Mr Chair. Councillor Gates, we have an item, I think it's item 8 on our agenda today, which will go into more specifics about our flood modelling and reviews that we've been undertaking at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That must be where I read it.
So I guess the situation we're faced with is we either run into a technical non-compliance because of the height incursion, or we have a technical non-compliance with the flood code, and officers have supported a technical non-compliance with the height. What would be our options to, if we were satisfied that there was enough resilience in the system from a flood perspective, what would be our options in terms of preserving the height provisions and providing the technical non-compliance on the flooding component?
Through you, Mr Chair, it's officers' strong recommendation to the committee that we adopt the technical non-compliance with the height. The technical non-compliance for the flood code, we believe you can't do that. It's set via the building regulation. It's actually a mandatory requirement that habitable floor areas be 300 mils above the defined DFL. So it makes it almost impossible for council to pass a resolution on that.
Okay. Any other questions, councillors? Councillor McDonald?
Yes, Mr Chair. On page 60 of the officer's assessment has determined that this character is envisaged to change and that due to dwelling density and overall building height of 15 metres. Now, the information that I have is that actually building height in this area is going to be reduced. Can you just have the officers please clarify that?
Through the Chair, you are correct in the major amendment package that the building heights are proposed to reduce to 12 metres, but in the current city plan, it's 3 storeys and 15 metres. Well,
Mr Chair, the officers more or less have said that the anticipated scale and intensity for this development are contemplated for the area. And I would say that's not the case, seeing that the heights are actually being reduced by 3 metres.
So, Councillor McDonald, I think the officer's reference is in relation to the current scheme as it applies to this particular application's assessment. But I don't know, someone might want to make a comment about a point in time where we start to cast our mind forward as to what the scheme might look like in the future, Mick?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I probably can't say it too much better than that, but for this assessment, we've had to assess the application against the relevant benchmarks, which is the current city plan, and also, you know, the city plan at the time this application was lodged in 2018. So at some point in time, more than likely once the ministers endorsed, if they choose to endorse the amendments, and we're getting closer to an actual date when those amendments will commence, that'll be the time that we would start having regard to those new amendments.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor McDonald, you don't need to stand.
Could I please ask when that time frame is going to be?
Well, the Director might be able to give you some indication of that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor McDonald, we've got an item coming up later in this agenda. I think it's item 7, which will talk about the work program for city planning as a whole. But for Amendment 2 and 3, we're still on track to submit that to the Minister in September. Obviously, through the 4th round of consultation, we got a high volume of submissions, and our team have been busily working through doing each of those responses to each of the submitters. And in some case, submitters would have submitted in round 1, round 2, round 4 or round 3, so there's quite a bit of work in it. At the same time too, we've been working with the state government informally to make sure that when we do submit it in September, it's not a surprise to the state government, and the officers, particularly in the Gold Coast office, have had a chance to go through it.
So, Councillor McDonald, just bear in mind, of course, that in any event, you're still only talking about the difference between 12 metres and 15,
yep.
Of which, if you look at the building as it presents to the street, you're probably talking about something that's around about 12.8 to 12.9 metres. So there'd be an imperceptible difference between probably the way this building will present in this approval versus what might still be approved under the new provisions.
I understand that, Mr. Chair, but there is reference in there about other buildings that have been given approval by officers and council. And also the density is a concern, again, where it's 1 bed per 50 under the plan, and with this application it's 1 bedroom per 34.75.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Pda.
Thanks, Chairman. Good morning. So theoretically, the development could achieve a height of 22 metres given the 50% uplift.
Yeah,
that applies in the area.
Through the chair, yeah, that's correct. In regard to the metres, it could.
But it's 15, and so in terms of height, it's fine. It's just the stories which is the problem.
Yeah.
The density is obviously over. What's the intended density under the amendments that have been discussed, please?
Through the chair, it's changing to low medium density zoning. But I don't have the information for the actual density designation for the site in front of me.
RD5.
So it's currently medium, and it will become
currently
low medium?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it's currently RD5 as well, and yeah, it's not changing. It's still going to be RD5.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Someone like to move that one? Moved by Councillor Young. I'll second it if no one else is going. Anyone want to speak? Councillor Pauline Young, did you want to speak for or against?
Just for the application, Chair, it's and it's a really good detailed report explaining that level of non-compliance. And again, with what Councillor Peter Young indicated was that potentially this client could have applied for 22 metres, which is with the 50% uplift in the area. So they've stated that the 15 metres and at the technical non-compliance is with that small basement area there. And I think based on where this site is situated across the road from Tully Creek, and that is an important thing to actually take into consideration, which is also what's happened on the opposite side of the creek on Awunga Crescent with a similar, not dissimilar, application over there that was approved recently, and it's the amenity of this area lends itself to having been and walked the whole loop around the street there just to see what's actually happening in the area. And whilst there are a lot of single dwellings in there, there are also buildings, especially on the western end of the street, that are very similar to what we're seeing here. So I think we're looking at urban improvements going through the area. I think this is a great indication of what potentially can occur in that area, and it's again supporting a level. We can have 3 or 4 families that will actually get to enjoy that Tallabudgera Creek area there as well. It's close to public transport. It's in a great walking precinct, and I actually think it's a good proposition. It's a good application for the area.
Anyone else want to speak for or against? Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very interested in this item because I'm going to have something similar at the next round. And have to consider it in the same way. I just noticed on page 62 there's a technically a 5-storey and 15-metre building at 30 Merlon Crescent, and I think that's what we have to look at when we're talking about the area and keeping in with the envisaged character of the area. That's already there. So, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to, we're speaking forward because I don't think it's too much of a stretch to approve that. I think it's going to fit in quite nicely. And in my area, the one that I'll be looking at, we've got even higher buildings that I wouldn't agreed with long ago when they got approved. But I think it's very tasteful, and yeah, I'm happy to support it.
I mean, in ordinary circumstances, we would be able to condition a reduction to achieve a compliance, but in this situation we've heard from the officers it's absolutely critically important that we maintain the flood clearance, and so in those circumstances I think it's the right thing for us to do. Anyone else want to speak for or against? Councillor Gates.
If you don't mind my asking just one further question about our ability to change anything. Is there, through the chair, any ability to change the floor to ceiling height on the floor levels?
Well, we can, but are you talking about whether that would compress? So the problem is where that first slab starts, because the first slab's the one that needs to have the clearance. So what happens floor to ceiling above that doesn't have any consequence.
Okay.
As I understand.
Yeah, through the chair. So
it's the 5 storeys that's the issue.
It's just where the basement slab protrudes from the ground.
Okay. Thank
through the chair, that's correct. Yeah, we could condition that the floor to ceiling heights are reduced, assuming it doesn't result in non-compliance with the relevant building codes. But the nature of the non-compliance is from that basement level, which we can't. Reducing it would result in non-compliance with the flood code.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else want to speak for or against? Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Item 4. I'll get Lara to come up. So, councillors, just before we get too far into this one, we've had a notice from the applicant to stop the clock, which means that effectively we can't make a final decision now, or potentially at council if the stop the clock notice is still active at that time. So did anyone have any questions for Lara in relation to the application proper? Councillor Pda.
If that request has been made, could we at least see it, or could it be minuted?
Yes, so what we're going to do, what we proposed to do was give council some guidance for a point in time where the decision can be made once the stop the clock notice is no longer in effect. So, Lara, did you want to bring up an alternative resolution? So, Did you actually give us 3 options?
I'll jump in, Laura.
2.
Mr. Chair, if I could jump in.
Yeah.
So councillors, yesterday evening, we actually received a notice from the applicant stating they wanted to stop the current period under the Planning Act, which they're entitled to do. And I guess what the effect of that is that the council cannot make a decision while the clock is stopped, so to speak. So today, I guess we've got a few options. We can. It's entirely up to the committee. We can just simply defer the application until another time, or if the committee was of a mind to, I guess, express an opinion on it and state whether or not they endorse the officer's recommendation, that could be noted. And in the event that the applicant starts the clock, for example, the day after the council meeting, and we've got a few days to make a decision, then we've got some guidance from committee and council and we can resolve that application under delegation. So it's a little unknown at the moment, and it's a lot, I guess, out of our control in terms of timeframes, but my recommendation would be ideal if we did have, I guess, some guidance from the committee, and that the committee just notes that it can't make a decision, but leave the flexibility there for that application to be resolved depending on how the applicant chooses to, or when they choose to start the clock again, or not.
So we all understand it may be the case that the clock restarts and the officers are in a position where they need to make a delegated decision. So
how does the clock get restarted, Chairman?
How does the clock get restarted?
So through the chair, the clock restarts basically when the notice to stop the current period ends or when the notice is withdrawn. So the applicant just needs to, present correspondence to us to that effect.
So does the current notice have a time frame applied to it?
Through the chair. So the notice that was submitted yesterday evening was from today, so stopping the clock from today, the 15th, until the 24th of August.
Right.
We have 4 days left of decision period, but they could withdraw that at any time, meaning that we have to make a decision within those 4 days. So there may not be sufficient time to enable the application to be brought back to the Planning Committee.
Chairman, thanks. So I'm leaning towards option 2. Can we modify that so that we're informing the officers that we endorse the delegation if it's consistent with what's been presented to us, or can we not bind?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there's just, in the haste to sort of get these options on the screen, my recommendation would be option 1 and 2 as two separate parts to the resolution, so that I guess there's an opinion expressed by the committee and council, but because it can't make a decision, that's probably as far as we can go, and that it also notes that the application could be decided under delegation if need be.
Yeah. Well, that addresses my concern, Chair.
Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Gates.
Mr. Chair, it was only to move. I was going to go with option 2, but if that's what Mick's recommendation is, I'd be happy to move that as is.
Let's just, so good thinking. I'll just get through some more questions and we'll come back to that perhaps just to make sure we've wrapped it all up. Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. Could I just ask through you to the officers, that car parking area, was that approved as part of the initial application at that scale?
Through the chair, the car parking area was always nominated and approved as part of the preliminary approval, which endorsed the plan of development over the King's Pimpama campus.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? All right, so if we support the officer's recommendation to refuse it and that we support that occurring at a time that can be achieved once the notice period expires or is withdrawn, then that's wrapped up in this. So we'll have that moved by Councillor Hamill. Someone like to second that? Councillor Pda. Councillor Hamill, did you want to speak to that? Anyone else want to speak for or against? We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried.
Name recorded, please.
Name recorded against.
Yeah.
Councillor Gates' name recorded against. Now, councillors, I've just had an update from Councillor Vorster, who won't be able to make it this morning. So would someone like to move an apology for Councillor Vorster? Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor Owen-Jones. All in favour? Against? Carried. Hear, hear. Item 5. Presentation. All right, councillors, did we have a presentation on this one, or did you just, yeah?
Yep.
Do you want to do that?
Good morning through the chair. My name is Thomas Stubbs, Planning Officer within the North team, and I'll be presenting item 5 on today's agenda. Agenda item 5 is a minor change and extension to the currency period for a development permit for a material change of use for 5 apartment buildings at 97 to 105 Musgrave Avenue and 28 to 30 Jimison Avenue, Labrador. The subject site encompasses a total of 7 allotments with a combined area of 13,003 square metres, all zoned within the low density residential zone. Most notably, the site has road frontages to Musgrave Avenue, Kumbari Avenue and Jimison Avenue, and the site features the old squash and tennis court in which currently sit in a dilapidated and abandoned state. The original development permit issued on the 3rd of February 2012 facilitated 5 apartment buildings of up to 6 stories and 20.9 metres in overall height, 177 units, 399 bedrooms, and provided a residential density of 1 dwelling per 73.5 square metres. During the assessment of the original application, officers considered the proposal to maintain compliance with the performance criteria of the detached dwelling domain, as the development would see the removal of a disused, rundown tennis and squash court centre and the implementation of a carefully designed residential development specifically sited to maintain the residential amenity of adjoining lots. In 2014, Council issued a generally in accordance in which saw the introduction of 1-bedroom apartments within buildings 3, 4 and 5 and an increase to 203 units and 400 bedrooms with no changes to the built form. On the 18th of November 2016, the Planning and Environmental Court resolved to revive the approval and to be taken to have not lapsed within the meaning of Section 341 of the Sustainable Planning Act. In addition, the development approval was extended to the 18th of November 2020. As the application was in effect during the extension notice issued by the Minister pursuant to Section 275R of the Planning Act, the application benefited from a 6-month extension to the currency period, extending the lapse date to the 18th of May 2021. Through the current extension application, a request to further extend the currency period for additional 2 years is requested. In addition to the extension application, the applicant proposes a minor change to the approved plans in which seeks to reduce the overall building height of all apartment buildings to not exceed 17 metres in height as shown above. To facilitate the change, the removal of level 5 and reconfiguration of level 6 for buildings 1 and 2 is proposed, along with the removal of level 4 of buildings 3, 4 and 5 and redesign of the skillion roof components as shown. The change results in a revised residential yield of 171 units and 342 bedrooms at a residential density of 1 dwelling per 76 square metres. Officers are supportive of the proposed extension as the provisions of the original assessment benchmarks are considered comparable to the relevant provisions under the City Plan. The development maintains a character consistent with the surrounding sites, including Sphere, Southport Sharks, Pinnacle at the Park and the Commonwealth Games Village. In addition, the minor change request is also supported as it will result in alleviating amenity impacts, decrease the expected number of people on site whilst maintaining original on-site parking availability and make use of a valuable infill development opportunity allotment. Through the chair, this completes my short presentation. I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Very good. Any questions? Councillor Barton-Lumsden.
Just curious, Chair, about a few different things. So for the extension, when it was first approved in 2012, what were the benchmarks that it met at that point? Because the wording was detached dwellings, whereas these are 5 apartment towers.
So through the Chair, the domain was, the detached dwelling domain, and now it's the low density residential zone.
Okay. And which benchmarks in the low density residential is it meeting? Like, is it, just for clarity, acceptable outcomes, performance outcomes? At what point does the 5-storey towers fit in low density residential?
Yeah, so through the Chair, it would be the strategic framework along with the overall outcomes of the low density residential zone.
Are we able to...
How the operation of city plan is probably far superior to these types of outcomes.
What was that, sir?
It's probably a living and breathing example of how city plan is a better tool for getting the right, foreshadowed outcomes.
Okay. So for the 2 parts, there's an extension and a minor change. Which city plan are they being assessed against? Is it what they were approved against in 2012 or the current city plan?
Through the Chair, the current city plan.
Okay.
Yeah, through the Chair, this is an assessment against the provisions of the Planning Act. This isn't a material change of use. It's an application for an extension and a minor change. So we're actually not assessing the benchmarks per se. This application is a reduction in height, a reduction in density. It went through the Planning and Environment Court and that was successful through an extension. The Planning and Environment Court considered there was enough merit or for actually approving the extension. This is, like I said, it's not a material change of use, so Thomas hasn't done an exhaustive assessment, benchmark assessment.
Okay. That was my apologies. I didn't mean I meant minor change, not material change. So that was my fault. Okay, so I'm just having difficulty obviously understanding. I don't know all the different benchmarks at different levels of city plan, but it just seems odd to me that a 5-storey tower would fit a low density residential zoning under our city plan.
It was assessed under 2003.
Yes.
So it's not, you can't compare what might be achieved. If someone came in tomorrow and launched under city plan, they wouldn't get 5-storey towers.
But for our...
And that's what my point about city plan's operation is that it actually is far more effective in getting the building types in those areas that we want to achieve.
Yes. Before the consideration today, though, isn't that being made under that 2016 city plan?
Through the Chair,
you need to listen to what Roger says on that point particularly.
Yeah, through the Chair, this is a minor change request, so we're not actually assessing a material change of use. This application is smaller, it's less height, less density. That's what we're looking at today in terms of the provisions of the minor change test. Like I said, it's not a material change of use application. It's not a full assessment benchmark assessment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do they have a current approval on the site for the larger building, the higher density building? Is that correct? They've got a current approval?
Through the Chair, that's why we're here. The application is live because they made the application for an extension prior to the lapsing of that original approval. So yes, it is technically a live application.
Okay. And when would that current approval be due to lapse?
Well, through the Chair, that's an interesting question. When you make an application for extension, it acts as like a stay. So in other words, it doesn't actually lapse until council makes a decision on it. In theory, council could take a year to make a decision and the application remains live for that period of time.
Okay. I have another question. So, understand people would want to see development at that site. It's a very large site. It's not been used for what it was initially built for a long period of time. But if this current approval was applied for today, or the minor change to it, if that was applied for under our current city plan, where would that sit in that assessment? Would it be likely to be recommended approval? Would it have conditions? Where would that sit?
Through the chair, it's an interesting question because that's really not the exercise that we've actually done as part of the assessment. Like I've said,
Yes.
we've assessed it as a minor change. In relation to posing the question, would we support it today? My response is, well, we haven't had the correct application all the time to assess what you're actually talking about. So I can't make comment on that, other than the Planning and Environment Court assessed this application to keep it live, and they actually considered the application was suitable.
That assessment happened in 2016, though, by the Planning Court, and that would have been done prior to the current city plan being endorsed?
When the court decided the extension, the city plan was in effect.
In effect, okay. But there would have still been that 12 months, whatever is the grace period from a new city plan being endorsed? Superseded. Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, through the chair, there's a 12-month window for superseded applications, but the city plan was in force at the time.
Okay. So, Chair, just my reason for the line of questioning, I understand the officers haven't done that level of assessment because it's not that kind of application. I was just curious because my understanding of our current city plan wouldn't envision this type of building in that location. And that's why I've just been very curious. Do we have legal obligations to grant extensions and approvals of this nature? So
there's two things. We've received the application to extend and make the minor change, so we have to assess it.
Yes.
So yes, we're under a lawful obligation to do that.
I meant to approve it.
No, well, it's open to us to make whatever decision we want today. But so that's the first thing. The second thing is that the assessment of the minor change is a different test of assessment than receiving and assessing an application that was made as a new application today under city plan on that site.
Okay. So I guess what my questions essentially boil down to, I understand that level of assessment hasn't been made, but I am particularly curious, does our current city plan, if this was an application made today, envision this kind of building in that location, or is it not characteristic of what our city plan's envisioning for that site?
So Roger probably tried to avoid answering that question, probably fairly, but I'll give you my best assessment, and that is that we don't generally view that 5-storey medium-rise, medium-density towers would be sitting in low-density residential detached dwelling areas. So I think I would have difficulty supporting it under city plan provisions. But as I said, this assessment was originally made under the 2003 scheme, and under the operation of that scheme, it was supported and lawful.
Yes.
And then if you turn to page 331, we then cast our mind into the future as to what might occur under the Amendment 2 and 3 package, where the applicants have clearly been cognisant of what might be coming and then made minor changes that are in line with what has now been envisaged to be put on the site. So we're in an interesting timeline, but they could, if the Amendment 2 and 3 package are accepted, they could then make a code accessible application, and my comments about what we would do in today versus then would be different.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. In regards to page 331, again, my understanding was there is no consideration being given to the major amendments 2 and 3. Councillor McDonald was just told similar in item 3.
I'm not saying that's part of the decision-making assessment, but it is a matter of factual existence that down the line there is advertised provisions that do something different.
Okay. My current view on. I don't understand or appreciate the cost for the applicant, but to me it seemed more worthy to note their current approval, and if they wanted to lodge a similar application, if major amendments 2 and 3 are adopted and endorsed, as you said, it seems to be more fitting with what's currently been proposed for the site in the future as opposed to the current city plan. I'm just of the belief that our current city plan is guiding what we want to see in the city at this current time, and from my perspective at a glance to it, doesn't seem to meet what current city plan anticipates for the site.
So, Councillor Owen-Jones and Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to Roger, and just in regards to the minor change, on page 316 it lists some history in regards to the public notification period and how there'd been 64 properly made objections were lodged and 79 properly made submissions were received supporting the proposal. In the context of a minor change, who are actually the stakeholders? Do we need to communicate back those changes to those people that may have actually had rights?
Through you, Mr Chair, no. We have two types of changed applications. One's an other change and one's a minor change. If an application fits, in officer's opinion, the criteria for what a minor change is, there is no statutory obligation to notify or to have the original submitters involved. If it was an other change application, yes.
And here we're effectively, I'm going to say, winding back intensity proposed for the site, which is fundamentally why you're saying minor. And if we were to look back at the submission, that kind of window of the submissions, there was actually more people submitted in favour of what was actually a higher density on that side under the 2003 scheme than submitted against it. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you, and through the chair, and I think it's Megan, my understanding of what we're trying to achieve here, and my understanding it's the same applicant that round 216 we were given court orders to extend it to a point now. The development hasn't gone ahead, so I suppose my question is, as the applicant, did they have the ability just to ask for an extension, or is that why they've asked for a minor change? Is it a process for the triggering and extensions?
Through the chair, they can ask for an extension at any time before the approval lapses. Unfortunately, the approval lapsed. That's why they had to go to the court in the first instance. In terms of having to do the minor change, they elected to lodge a minor change after they lodged the extension of time to reduce the height. That was their understanding to appease council officers in terms of the extension of time. So that was their decision to lodge the minor change after the extension of time application.
Okay, so we've got the ability and taken consideration Councillor Belden-Lumsden's concerns of moving forward, we've got the ability to say not accept the extension, and then that would then mean the applicant would then have to put in a new application and will be assessed on the current scheme?
Through the chair, if the extension of time was to be refused, then the application would be taken to lapsed, and then the minor change would be null and void, essentially, because the approval would have been lapsed.
Through you, Mr Chair, and just in addition to that, absolutely, that's committees and council's prerogative if they choose to give the extension or not. But the applicant will have appeal rights under the Act, and they will have the opportunity, should they choose to, I guess, appeal that decision if council was to refuse the extension.
Yeah, so that was my question. They do have that appeal right. I suppose if it goes to the appeal right, that a refusal at this level gives them the ability. We don't know where that's going to land, but as a city where we want that to actually go, in my view, they've had a long period of time. They've gone to the courts once before. I know we didn't win at that time, but I think what we're looking, that area is changing. Look, I'm not a legal side, but I'm feeling that the applicants had this bit of the land for a long period of time and has gone through the court process and hasn't done anything with it, which is a challenge for the city. I think at some point we need to ensure that the applicants are delivering on what they promise, and by constantly giving extension, all that's doing is setting a precedence to say that we're not really serious in relation to the new changes moving forward. So, yeah, just more of a clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Hamill.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the Director. I'm curious about this point with regard to the appeal rights for perhaps more generally than this case too, regarding extensions. So if it was that we refused an extension, I know you can't tell me what a court would say, but is it how do they look at that? Like, is it I'm curious about this, and I'm also curious about other ones that come up in the CBD in terms of what would we expect to be receiving back from courts on a decision on something like this. If we just look at it and go, right, no, we don't want to extend because, for example, we've given you your time, that's it, done. How would a court perceive that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Patterson, it'd be the same criteria that the council is using now. Obviously, the court would, once you go through an appeal, you'll generally have experts appointed. Those experts have got a duty to the court, so it'd be a different process, but the criteria would be the same. And I probably can't answer what the court would actually say, but they're playing by the same rules, so to speak.
Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Bowden-Lumsden, then Councillor Gates.
Mr. Chairman, question through you, it may be more of a question to Mick possibly, but with extensions of currency, we're able to attach conditions to those in this kind of circumstance, are we? That if we were to grant another extension of the currency, it can have a condition saying if you don't enact the development before the lapse of this next extension, you will have to go back and relodge again due to the time frame since your initial application that changes the city plan since. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, officers think no. I suppose you could tailor the currency decision to stipulate a time frame. We have toyed with the idea of advice notes to advise that council won't do any further extensions in the future, but I don't believe we can set conditions. No.
Conditions might have been the wrong word, but we do have an ability to set a very clear expectation to them and saying that because of changes in city plans since your initial application, if you don't get on with it this next currency extension, we're not going to support another one. If they choose to appeals, they're right, but set them the warning that they maybe have to go back to the drawing board and resubmit under the current planning scheme.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is, look, I don't think you can set a prohibition. It's an applicant's prerogative that they can apply for an extension if it is a valid live application. I'm happy that we could consider an advice note advising that.
Whatever it was.
Councillor Bowden-Lumsden, then Councillor Gates and Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the most recent minor change, just for number of beds, units, car parks. So I saw the first application had 177 units, 399 bedrooms, 231 car parks. There we go. So the bottom one's the most recent, is it? Okay. 171. And what does that number of car parks add up to, sorry? 90, 144. Okay.
Situation is all the same. So the built form's not changing. It's just the height is being reduced, but the actual car parking numbers and configuration is staying the same.
Okay.
So because there's been a reduction in unit numbers and density, there would be a consequential increase in car parking rates. Good question, Councillor Belden-Lumsden. That's even more persuasive than I was persuaded before.
I just didn't see the last one because I was always curious because it's only got the one vehicle entrance point to the site on Jimison, which I'm just mindful it's a very quiet street. Cumbari, Musgrave are obviously far busier. It just seemed like it'd be a lot of vehicle traffic coming out of what is currently a very quiet residential street of mostly 1 and 2 story dwellings. Not mostly, entirely 1 and 2 story. Okay, the traffic assessments that were done in a decade ago when it was first approved, are they much similar to what we'd envision with our current traffic management assessments?
Through you, Mr Chair, are correct. They're the same criteria. Jimison would be capable of 750 vehicle trips a day. The amount of current dwellings on Jimison, they're well below that. In response to your observation about access off Jimison, it's the flip side. We try to avoid as many extra entrances on busy roads to ensure that we're actually getting flow of traffic. So council officers actually consider Jimison as actually a better access point than Cumbari or Musgrave.
Okay. Thank you for
that. Councillor Gates and Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll be really quick, but am I correct in that the minor change, the proposed height of the minor change is 17 metres, and the proposed height, as with this area being part of the priority growth area, is 17 metres?
Through the Chair, correct on the last one. The overall height changes. Yeah, as shown on that slide there. So it'll show the original height on the left, and then on the right, what it's proposed to change to.
So on page 320, it says reducing the overall building height for all buildings to be a maximum of 17 metres. So
yes,
it's
through
what
the chair.
we envisage for the area.
Perhaps a better way of putting it was that they all fall below the 17 metres.
Below
so because in actual fact, this is quite illustrative. Again, I'm being more persuaded. 15.7, 15.7, 15.9, 16, 16.
Sure. So it's what we envisage in this area and what we've done heaps of consultation on twice, or how many times? 16. 4 times?
4 times, 3,
Four
Mr Chair.
times. So it's what is envisaged for this area and what the community expectation would be by now. Thank you. That's all I need to know.
Councillor Taylor and Councillor RBL.
But we can't take account of what's envisaged.
No, through you, Mr Chair, the report on, I think it's page 320, does stipulate that there's been no weight given to the amendments, but you'll see with quite a lot of our DA reports, we do just a little, this is what is coming, and we've done that since the advertising rounds of Major 2 and 3, but there's been no weight.
Thank you. Really going back to the advisory note or conditions, and I think my concern is also these developments that aren't going ahead as well, and where and constantly triggering. Is there a way, and obviously they can appeal it at some point, is there any way that we can put an advisory note or something that could strengthen our condition down the track, that we're saying to the applicant there is changes? So if they continuously, because I'm presuming in 2 years' time they would have the ability to do a minor change again, another 2 years extension, and obviously that's going to be in the same boat as now. If we did grant approval for this, we don't want to be in 2 years' time having the same conversation. Is there a way that we can strengthen our position to mitigate the scenario that's happening around the city of these development sites that are actually just doing minor changes, just to continue on that when we've got city plan changes?
Through you, Mr Chair, it's a difficult question to respond to, Councillor Taylor, because as you've quite rightly said, it is an applicant's prerogative if it's a live application. Like I said, we've toyed with this in the past, and I think the best that we can offer up is a strong advice note, if that's what the committee does want. we're happy to formulate an advice note.
Councillor Bowden-Lumsden.
Thanks, Chair. I really appreciate it. It has all clarified a lot of things for me, so I really do appreciate that. For the extension and the minor change, if they're granted an approval for an extension of 2 years and then also the minor change is approved, do they have the ability to build either one, or does the minor change void the previous approval?
Through the chair, the minor change amends the development approval, and then that is the approval that's in force. So it amends the original approval. If they wanted to go back to that, they would have to lodge a change application to revert back or make any changes to the approval then.
Okay, so the minor change is approved. They will only be able to build the minor. Okay, because the minor change does seem like a substantially better outcome than the previous approval. Okay. In regards to the major amendments 2 and 3 and the number of rounds of consultation, I actually feel like that made it less clear because we've gone through so many rounds. Maybe there has been uncertainty about what that side envisions, but no, I appreciate all the answers today. It's clarified a lot of things for me. I think the minor change is definitely a better outcome than what's previously been approved for the site, and understand the assessment that's had to go into the background of it. Thank you. Yay. Don't.
Okay, we're done. Someone like to move the officer's recommendation? Moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor Pauline-Young. Did you want to speak to it, Councillor Gates?
No, I don't think it's necessary, Chairman, other than to say that I'd like to congratulate the divisional representative for being so thorough in making sure that he understood this, which is a complicated matter when you're not seeing them frequently on our planning agenda. So well done, Councillor Bowden-Lumsden.
There'll be a few more coming through in the next year or two.
All right, anyone else want to speak for or against? Right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Item 6 we dealt with, I think. Item 7... Council, is everyone comfortable to push through for a bit longer? Right, should we have a short presentation, Councillor Jones? You happy with that?
Thank you.
Oh, Catherine thought she was off the hook there, but...
Good morning, councillors. This morning we'd like to discuss it.
Can't hear you. No, there you go.
Yep. This morning we'd like to present to you a forward program for the City Plan Work Program. What you will note in the report is that we are starting to look beyond our operational budget each year, so starting to identify projects that we would like to do at a regional level, but also future investigation areas or neighbourhood framework planning. So what we're seeking today is your support for the program. You'll see a number of items on there. We are proposing to bring another agenda item back to Council in August, which will detail the breakdown of major update 5 and 4, as previously resolved by Council. We'll also start to outline what we think makes for a themed-based program, so looking at employment, residential, looking at design, and how we can look at those items and start to group our program and our future projects to make sure that we continue to align with shaping SEQ and provide the best development outcomes for the city while we manage growth. That's the short presentation.
That was excellent. Councillor Jones.
So I'm happy to move it, but I would also, the reason why I hadn't started is to ask, I suppose, because we've been through so many rounds of consultation, I'm going to say that I got a little bit lost as to where the information was going to the state. So I had assumed, I think incorrectly, and this report is the most crystal clear that I've seen in a long time, that we'd actually parcelled it up to the state, awaiting for the minister. And my understanding is that the minister hasn't received it yet, but his officers have received a draft copy. Is that correct, of Amendments 2 and 3?
Is that,
Through you, Mr Chair, I'm happy to, and if we get to a point where I think we need to go into close, we will. As you know, we've been working with state officers for a long time through this process, so we've certainly, and Catherine and her team have a fortnightly meeting, I think, so they're certainly across the details. I think within the next week or two, we're ready to informally submit the whole package as a whole, and what that will allow is obviously us to know if there's anything else that we need to do before that time of submitting it formally to the minister, which, as I said earlier, we're still on track for September.
Okay, and am I correct in saying because of the rounds of consultation, each time we receive a piece of information that comes out of that consultation, we actually need to do the right thing, and that's actually read it, which is a good start, and also see whether or not it needs to change what we've done or agreed upon previously. So part of the delay in the pushing through of Amendments 2 and 3 is the volume of material that's been received and the need to carefully manage it in accordance with the ministerial rules.
Through Mr Chair, and Catherine can step in at the end here and probably go into more detail, but you're correct, Councillor Jones, and in the past, I guess, we've probably been quite light on the responses to submitters, particularly from a city plan, in terms of this is your response and this is what we're doing. Catherine and her team have been doing a brilliant job at going through, and like I said earlier, some people may have submitted 4 rounds or 3 rounds, and it's a lot of work to then individually respond to each of those submission points. And Catherine can probably go into the numbers of submission points that we're responding to at the moment, but you're correct, essentially that's, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Thanks, Alicia, and through the Chair, yes, we are working through all submissions to make sure that we've reviewed them all correctly, and in responding to those submissions as well, that the story they get back in terms of the changes that have occurred through each round is actually a logical response to the submission points raised.
Okay.
So I think, Councillor Jones, our only obligation is to receive and consider, or words to that effect, is that right? And I think the officers are going probably above and beyond in terms of their consideration. So.
Yeah. And which is great, but I suppose the challenge that we have is very broadly there may be somebody that is critical of the council not pushing through and adopting Amendments 2 and 3, but that same person may also have lodged something that's been carefully assessed by officers. So it's kind of a balancing act that we have, and unfortunately we've got a series of rules that we have to comply with in regards to when it does turn up at the state.
And I think, Mr Chair, if I can, the program that our team have done, which you see up on the screen now, is really simplifying so that in the future we don't have a huge amendment package, a very complex amendment package that goes through such a high number of consultation periods. And we're doing, as we're seeing at the moment, early engagement, which that's a new process for us, and that's working really well so far. And I guess breaking that down, you can then see what points we're proposing to come back to council, when it will go to the ministers and when it will go to the state. And the state have been very good at working with us to ensure our processes are as smooth and as efficient as possible as well.
Okay. So I don't have any other questions, but I'm happy to speak to it.
All right. Councillor Belden-Lumsden, followed by Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. I just actually wanted to start by saying I feel like City's done a very good job with the consultation. Each round of consultation seemed to get better and better as well. So the most recent round was excellent, very multimodal, covered all bases there. Was just wondering, from the previous round of consultation, councillors were supplied with a bit of a breakdown of the general gist of each of the submissions, like where they came from, were they generally in support of, against, those kind of things. Would we be able to get something similar for this most recent round of consultation?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Batten-Lumsden, we absolutely can. I think there was some very useful infographics, and I think we had a weight as well, so we can look at that.
Okay, because the breakdown we got given previously was very straightforward, I think, for us to understand and for the public to understand. And it'd be good to, I think, have that shown that we have considered all applications and this is why we've made whichever decision we do. Thanks.
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. Just through you to the Director. The City Plan Steering Committee and the working groups, the various working groups, are they just made up of council officers?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Gates, they are, but I think our state government officers can be attendees on those as well, depending on what's on the agenda. But at a point, I guess the governance around how we do city plan amendments into the future has been completely overhauled, and Catherine and her team have done that in the last couple of months, and making sure that we've got the right collaboration being undertaken between other directorates in council as well. So, for instance, you might have a package that's solely focused on transport items, and making sure that our colleagues over in transport and infrastructure are taken through the whole process at that point.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Owen-Jones moving it. Someone like to second it? Councillor Gates. Any other questions? Councillor Owen-Jones, you want to speak to it?
Thank you. I just wanted to start by thanking Catherine and Richard for the work that they're doing in the space, and I think that you're actually providing some nice clarity to a very complex thing that has lots of moving parts, and I'd point everybody to attachment A, which is page 683 of the agenda, where there's a Gantt chart which effectively shows all of the steps for all of those components, and I think that that's a really good snapshot, and I hope that that turns up on the city's website at some stage as part of the explanation as to where we're at. So because people can see, I think importantly, where things are proposed to come towards council, and if I can just talk directly to the Oxenford investigation area, where I think that we did some really good preliminary work in terms of communication to the community as to what that might look like. And even though we've done an enormous amount of work in that space, I still have some community members who believe that there's a predetermined position of council in regards to that investigation area, and just that one line just shows how many, it's effectively going to come to council at least 4 times, and including a couple of times of community consultation before we even see something turning up. And when it does turn up, it's probably 2023, which is about 12 months after what we had originally proposed. But so I think that it's a great body of work that is here, and it didn't deserve to be starred without being spoken to. So well done.
Councillor Pda.
Thanks, Chairman. There are 2 investigation areas proposed in Division 5, and there's to be a report to committee in September about them, and I wonder if I might be afforded the opportunity to meet with the officers before that report is prepared, which doesn't give us a lot of time. Thanks, Chairman. I've got a nod from the Director, that'll do.
Yep. Hard nod. Excellent. Right, any other questions? Councillor Owen-Jones, you happy with the debate to be closed? Do you want to say anything further? Catherine was so happy that you unstarted, I could just tell. All right. To give her a start. Excellent. All right, we'll take the vote. Did you know that yesterday was P&E Directorate Appreciation Day? Yeah. But anyway, we can probably extend it until 10:15 today if we'd all just like to give them, our P&E team a round of applause. Thank you. All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. We're trying to get out of here. There's a Councillors, there are some morning tea packs. Do you want them distributed to your desks? Is that convenient, or do you want to just keep pushing through, or does anyone want to take a 5-minute break? No? Okay. If you wouldn't mind, I'm happy. I think we can all just nibble and chat. Right, let's talk flooding.
Where's the photo? I reckon it's in Hamel country.
Sorry, first time. Good morning, councillors. Today my presentation, we're going through the new flood modelling inputs that we're using for the city and the transition of the methods that we're using for estimating what potential flood characteristics we get on the Gold Coast, so estimating our 1 in 100 year flood level. The purpose is to demonstrate that we're using the latest data, the latest technology and the latest methodologies in line with national guidelines. As detailed in the agenda, we're just seeking your endorsement of those inputs, which go through design rainfalls, the different simulation methods, an update in topography, and also how we've changed our downstream boundary conditions. So today, my overview of the presentation will go through a brief introduction of what is modelling 101, just what is the components of it, and then we'll go through the improvements that we've done to these models and what we've changed from the past in 2016 to what we're doing now. And also the consultation and the review process that we've undertaken throughout the whole process. So what is a flood model? It's basically a digital representation of the Gold Coast and its floodplains. It has 3 main components. It's basically rainfall, topographical features or physical features of the floodplain, and the outfall, where water drains to. Embedded within this is land use. It's representing our permeable levels, as well as where water drains through floodplain roughnesses. So what that means is water will run off quicker on a roof than it will do through soil. And similarly, when water travels over concrete, it will move much faster than as it would go through rough reeds. The outputs are flood depths, flood velocities, and flood hazards, and other supporting information that will be used in our city plan. The improvement to the flood models is basically the rainfall map has been updated. This is a component undertaken by the Bureau of Meteorology. The simulation approach has changed from the Australian Rainfall and Runoff in 1987 to a new edition in 2019. We've got better representation of our physical characteristics, and we've also changed our software platform and technology. So that basically means we're using better computers, more memory, and so forth. We've also improved the way that we represent our oceans. Previously they were sort of static, and now we're moving into time-varying components. I'll go through that just shortly. And also we've expanded our models to cover more area because we have more ability to represent them in our computers. We've also consolidated our models from 9 catchments and into 6. So for the rainfall update, the Bureau of Meteorology produced this information in 2019. When we investigated the data underlying the assessment, we found that they only incorporated records up into 2012. And as we know, we've had some significant flood events in 2017, and therefore we also analysed what other stations did they miss. And we found that there was 27 stations missing, and we thought that they weren't representing the local characteristics on the Gold Coast. So we asked them to redo their mapping for the Gold Coast region. That was called the Bureau of Meteorology's IFD updates, and it has been a bit of a prolonged process, but we've finally got there. Australian Rainfall and Runoff is also the component that specifies how we simulate that rainfall is distributed over our catchments. So they're a national guideline document, and they've transferred the way that we would, I guess, sprinkle water over our catchments from one component and into 10 different ways. So what that means is rainfall doesn't fall the same all the time. You can have sort of a front-end loaded storm or a back-end loaded storm. So the new methodology is specifying that we're getting that more variability and we're representing reality. On the review of the rainfall, we found that there were some increases in the upper estuaries of our catchments, and we could probably say that reasoning for this is that we've actually captured that rainfall rather than in the past we didn't capture it. So that's just the gist of it. In some areas of the cities, it went down, but this is just one entity of our rainfall, and therefore it's just indicative of, you know, where rainfall has gone up from time. The whole process has been peer-reviewed by industry experts. We've had Professor Rory Nathan from University of Melbourne review the information and also recommended that despite the differences between the two, choose the maximum between 2019 Bureau of Meteorology and our internal study. Obviously, since 2016, we've had significant advancements and changes in our catchments. We've had the Commonwealth Games facilities improved. We've had major infrastructure and municipal upgrades, so Hodder Bridge. Oop, how do we go back? Oop, how do I go back, sorry? Toggle back. Couple, thanks. So what that means is that we've now got a better representation of our topography. We've now included lots more structures in the models that we have in 2016, so a lot more bridges, a lot more culverts. We've also improved the representation and the growth of our city, so we've expanded into the Jacobs Wells area, and the way that the water is contributing to those particular catchments has changed, and therefore we want to represent that as best as possible. I've touched on it before, but we've transferred our software platform from Mike, which is a Danish Hydraulic Institute software platform, into TwoFlow. TwoFlow is an Australian-based software, and it's predominantly used by our industry within the local area. And we find that we're going to get a greater synergy between the development industry and council if we follow suit in that particular platform. As well as a transition in the software, we're also getting advancements in the underlying hardware that's used by the software, and that means that we've been able to expand the amount of representation that we can actually have within these models. So as well as speed advancements, we also get to represent a lot greater finer details. So our previous models would say represent the topography at a resolution of 5 meters. So what that means is, from a picture perspective, you only have so many pixels, and therefore if you increase the amount of pixels, you get a better clarity of what's going on the picture. In the same way that we do that with flood models, we get the same thing with a DEM or a digital elevation model with a greater representation. The only thing we are changing with the boundary conditions is that in the past we represented a static tailwater condition during a flood event, and we did this because it was a conservative way of working out the tidal interactions throughout the floodplain. So Nerang is a large estuary. It has multiple components of Mudgeeraba and Wurrungree, as well as the main Nerang river system. Getting the timing of the tide to peak at every location throughout those estuaries was very complicated. So therefore, we used a constant tide for that approach in 2016. And during the consultation process with industry, we found that that was too conservative, and it stymied some developments in some locations. So therefore, we've changed that to a dynamic tailwater condition, which means it will oscillate up and down as it does in reality, so that we get a realistic representation of during a 1 in 100 year flood event. The magnitude of what we anticipate to be the tide in the year 2100 is going to remain the same. We're not going to change that from the 2013 study that we did with the GHD. That's because climate projections haven't altered in the last 10 years from when we did that study, so there's no need to alter anything there. Due to the technological advancements, we've been able to model more comprehensively in the upper areas of our catchments. This graph here, or this picture here, demonstrates the local government area of the city, purple representing the urbanised areas, the hatched area representing the design flooding studies areas, and the blue represents the basin in which water contributes to those catchment areas. There's some areas that are outside the local government area, which is Logan, and it just contributes to the upper reaches of the Woongoolba floodplain. So rainfall in that area is represented, and it's routed down to our models into those locations. Why we've consolidated the 9 models that we had for the city from 2016 into 6 is because some of these catchments are sister catchments. For instance, Loaders and Bigara Creek, when you get a large flood, they will start to interact with one another down the lower end. Similarly with Tallebudgera and Currumbin. So in the past, our upper estuaries were also represented in a one-dimensional domain, which means it was more simplistic, but now we've transitioned to a full 2D flood simulation approach. So to summarise, the rainfall's been improved. We're now representing the records up until 2020. Our methodology is improved and is in line with AR&R 2019. Topography is the best information that we have at the time of 2018, and we've got a far greater resolution. We've also got better representations of our floodplain characteristics, of floodplain roughness, and the infrastructure that's embedded within the models. Our dynamic tailwaters will be represented, and we now cover the whole entire LGA. The outputs will now not just be a static DFL map or flood planning level, we'll also go into flood risk maps and a variety of different ARIs for different planning scenarios, including HinSTAM Stage 2 and HinSTAM Stage 3. Finally, the whole process has gone through an extensive consultation process. We've gone through each component in accordance with guidance from industry experts for both the hydrology and the hydraulics, as well as getting guidance from the actual creators of the software from 2Flow, as well as HERBS, which is the hydrologic software, which is estimating rainfall. And in the entire process, we've spoken with UDIA, PCA, PIA, and internal stakeholders within council as well. The recommendations is per the agenda item, and basically we're seeking your endorsements to use the best technology and best information available for us to do our flood modelling.
Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thanks, Chairman. That's great news altogether. Just a couple of questions. The rainfall data that's been modified by virtue of our own records, is that provided to BOM? Do they accommodate that within their records now, or?
They won't update it as a national record. They will just advise us now based on their data. And when they do a national assessment again, they'll incorporate all the data at that particular time. So they won't just update just the small component for the LGA of the Gold Coast. Otherwise, they'll have to do that for every other LGA that starts doing it. Yep. So it's more of a national rollout process. So they've advised that, yes, we should use that data.
Thanks. And I'm mindful of the ever-changing physical environment that impacts all of this. And I just thought to bring to your attention, the Gold Coast Water is going to be removing a weir on the Logan River, is it, Councillor? Pardon me? Albert River, that's right. Which would have quite a significant impact, I would imagine, on the hydraulics. And a question is about the time difference between the tidal influence, let's say, at the coast, or that's at the seaway, compared with the upper reaches of the Nerang River.
Yes.
Do you know what that time is generally?
Yeah, it does vary from the event to event, but during the process we take into consideration those focal points. So we will choose within the model as being, let's look at Mudgeeraba, let's work out how long water takes to route down to the bottom of, say, Firth Park, and then we will route the tide so it does peak at that same location. So we'll get an envelope for those particular scenarios as well. So it's numerous scenarios, not just one anymore. It's taking into consideration all of those approaches.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jim.
So I think just as an approximation, what would be the delay between high tide at the seaway versus high tide at the Nerang River crossing it somewhere up in Nerang, for example? What's the approximate?
Is it 30 minutes between, a difference between when the high tide impacts the seaway and then before its high tide impacts the upper reaches of Nerang River, or is it? I accept that it's different all the time, but is there an approximate?
Yeah.
Is it 30 minutes? Is it an hour?
Yeah, I'd say that it's about 30 minutes to an hour between the two. Yeah.
Did well.
You did very well. That's only because our weather apps only tell us what the high tide is at the Gold Coast Seaway.
Yeah. I'll stop while I'm ahead. Thanks, Jim.
Councillor Owen-Jones.
Thank you. I was just wondering if we could include the presentation as part of the minutes so that it's on the record. And then in regards to previous discussions we've had, we had resolved to invite the Insurance Council of Australia into that flood forum, and I know that they didn't appear to have participated, and I was just wondering if you've got any feedback in that space.
I'll refer to my...
Through the chair, the Flood Insurance Council of Australia, the Insurance Council of Australia have been part of the flood forum. They've attended virtually for the 3 meetings, and unfortunately, the last meeting, the representative has moved on to another organisation. So we're currently scoping a replacement to attend the forum.
Yeah, I don't think they were named during the presentation, but they have been involved.
Okay, and I think part of, even though this is a planning document, one of the challenges that we have is that in the past, some of the insurance companies have used our planning document as a foil for a dramatic increase in their insurance premiums. And as a property owner beside a creek, I can tell you that they tripled my insurance, or attempted to triple my insurance bill based on a City of Gold Coast mapping, and then they walked it back when they realised that nothing had changed. So I think that they, even though it's a planning document, I think they're a really important stakeholder in that conversation. We shouldn't allow them to say that they haven't been invited or to participate or to share knowledge.
Councillor Gates and Councillor Hamill.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 689 of the agenda, I was just confused, to be honest, about the use of flood models that have a level of uncertainty referred to as noise. Can you just explain that to me?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Refer to,
And am I right, just in reading that we're reviewing our toleration? Is that the word?
Tolerance.
Tolerance. Sorry. That's a beauty, isn't it? For the grammar girl.
Speaking of tolerance.
Toleration, tolerance.
Sounds like about 400 mil of tolerance.
From 2 millimetres to 10, which is a more reasonable suggestion comparative to other areas? Sorry, I'm a bit confused about this one.
There are 2 questions here. I see one of them is what's the difference between uncertainty and noise?
Yeah.
And the other one, are we going to increase our tolerance from 2 millimetres to 10 millimetre? Uncertainty is a difference between the true value of flood level, for instance, and what we can achieve based on our modelling, based on the best information available. And there is some level of confidence associated with that. So, for example, if I say flood level is this much and I have 95% confidence, so the flood level might be a bit higher or lower, but the most likely value is here. And we consider that in our modeling. But noise is something which is just noise. It's absolutely wrong. It has to be removed. So any calculations, any device, anything could have some noise. And if we can identify how much is that, quantify how much is that, we can remove it. And the question that our flood models, definitely they have uncertainty and it's being dealt with scientifically based on the best practice. And the question of noise, there is a diversity of views. Some engineers in industry, in particular, believe that this model is generating some noise. Some say 2 millimeters, some say 5 millimeters, some say 10 millimeter, and some people say no, it doesn't. So that's why we put this item, this paragraph in the reports, that from the feedback that we are getting from industry, we see there is a reason that we need to review this matter. In particular, when we see other local authorities, for example, allowing for a level of noise that is different from ours, there is a reason to review it. At this stage, we are not suggesting anything to change it from 2 to 10 or anything. Okay. We just want to inform you that we are investigating this matter.
Thanks, Hamid.
Thank
Councillor Hamill.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be correct that the reason for model noise on occasion is because of the input data in the first place. So for suggestion over a big basin like the Woongoolba flood area, if that's done by LiDAR, which already has a tolerance to it, and then later on it's proven by static survey that ground levels are actually different to what LiDAR picked up, that's going to lead noise in the model?
All of them will contribute in uncertainty.
Yeah. But input data in the first place to the model is critical to how accurate it's going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, which leads to my question is that, so the Woongoolba flood mitigation scheme was being reviewed by TNI, and at my request after attending a few meetings, I wasn't happy with LiDAR being used for their new sub-model, which I appreciate is only a small model compared to what you're undertaking, but at my request, static survey was done on the Woongoolba flood mitigation scheme drainage network to actually be able to prove what volume it can take through it to the ocean. Has that static survey data being used in the new model for the Albert Logan Pimpama catchment?
We have used LiDAR data, but for canals and that we need more accurate information. We have, for example, more detailed information that we have used.
So I might have confused myself there, Chess. It has the static survey data from TNI been used
specifically in relation, your question specifically...
Specific to that Albert Logan Pimpama catchment.
Sorry, what is that? What do you mean by a static survey, please?
Like surveyor out there with the GPS pole picking up static points.
Yeah, please.
Yes, we've received that information from TNI, from Brian Peters, and we're incorporating that into the model. At the moment, we're just talking about the imports, and we're just making sure that we get the go-ahead to go with a draw on the line in the sand of this is the information today, and this is the best that we've got, and moving forward, going from there. So yes, just to your question.
I appreciate that, Chair, and that was very specific to my area, but that was some important ground data that is going to be more accurate than LiDAR was. It'll help with that particular model. In regards to the model noise can be up and down, can't it? So it's not necessarily 10 millimetres positive, it could be 10 millimetres negative as well, or any quantity. Is that correct? It should really be a plus or minus thing when it comes to noise?
It could be plus 10, minus 10. But as I said, different engineers have different views, and that's why we are all investigating at this point. Yes, noise could be positive and negative. Yes.
Which can be proven. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, through you. I'm guessing that on a merit by merit basis, but that an application comes in and proves perhaps that our initial input data into our overall model wasn't accurate, or they can prove a different flood model specific to their site. We can adjust that with that through the application process, or we accept that?
The challenge that we have, I think, is we can't overload a development assessment officer with a lot of assessment. And they have, for example, 10 days to assess a development application. And if we give them, for example, we give them discretion and tell them you need to decide what should be between minus 10 or 10. So that officer needs to do many model runs to convince himself that it is 9 millimeter. It is not 9 millimeter, it is 8 millimeter. There is always a balance at the end of the day. The cost associated with the assessment, the time frame that we have. Sometimes we need to introduce a number here, just say 2 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 10 millimeter. Yeah, that might result in somebody might benefit 1 millimeter, somebody might be worse off 1 millimeter. But it's important to note this 1 or 2 millimeter up and down are within the uncertainty of all these calculations. So when I say that, I come to the conclusion that if I use 10 millimeter, this person would be worse off 2 millimeter. In reality, he might benefit 2 millimeter. This is within the uncertainty. That's the nature of engineering. At the end of the day, either we have to spend unlimited amount of resources and time to get to the pinpoint some results, or we just say, okay, plus minus 5, plus minus 10 is within the uncertainty. A bit of up and down is acceptable, but the benefits of an officer just has a very clear rule that he doesn't have to do so much work, outweighs that accuracy that we think that we are achieving, but it really is not accuracy, it's just a precision.
So I take from that, Mr. Chairman, that we are going towards a 10 millimetre number.
I would like to emphasize that at this stage we are not recommending anything. We haven't completed our investigation yet. We are just consulting with industry, with our partners, and we're looking into this matter, and we bring a report back. Is that right?
I think Hamid was using some numbers to illustrate how it works, not that the ultimate answer is going to be 10 millimetres.
Final question, Mr. Chair, and it's back on input data again. So I appreciate this kind of size model. When we redo it, we pick up LiDAR data across the entire city, and especially on hard surfaces, the tolerance in LiDAR is very accurate and getting better and better all the time as the software catches up with it. Do we take, on say, especially on bigger sites, like ASCON survey data and feed that into the input as well, or do we just rely upon brand new fresh LiDAR across a broader sector?
Yes, we do. So, for instance, the construction of the M1, the as-constructed data was received from TMR and incorporated into our models. So we received basically a tin, a representation of that final surface that they've designed, and we stitch that on the top.
So M1's probably an extreme example of it. So just an industrial development in Yatala, so that they've gone and introduced retaining walls and batter walls. That's been approved in ground level changes, but then the final ASCON survey of that, would that have been fed into the latest model?
Yeah, there are two dimensions to this matter. In general, the sensitivity of our models to ground level information is different at different locations. For example, if the ground level information on a major flow path is not right, the model would provide wrong results. If M1 is not represented, which is as a line from north to south, its level is not represented correctly in the model, it would have significant adverse impact on the results. So in those areas, we use ASCON and design values as much as practically possible. For the rest of the city, our experience is those minor changes in ground level doesn't have much impact on flood level. So you can introduce 10 centimeter random noise in our floodplains. The flood level might change only 1 or 2 millimeter. The flood depth is significantly will change, but models are not very sensitive to the noise in LiDAR data or ground level information, but they are very sensitive when, for example, we are putting M1 in the model. If M1 is 10 centimeter lower or higher, because it acts like a dam. Flow is coming from west to east. If it is 10 centimeter upper or lower, that has much impact. So we put our efforts to include accurate ground level information where it matters and where it has significant impact on the models.
That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Owen-Jones.
So I'm happy to move it.
Okay. Any other questions?
And I just want to ask, through the chair, your Ryan aid?
That's correct.
Yeah, that was a good report. I sort of understood it, which was some of these things that come forward you don't necessarily understand, but that was very well explained, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Councillor Owen-Jones, you want to move that?
Yes, thank you.
Someone like to second it? Seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Sorry. I should say before we move on to accept that motion, there was going to be a slight change proposed in paragraph 3, just in that last set of wording there, and I don't know if the officers distributed.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we didn't distribute it. I think we only sent it to you. Rich, I don't know if you want to speak in here, but basically it's just removing a couple of words out of number 3, which will just make sure when our team go through and do the review of the model noise, which Hamid and Ryan have explained, it's a bit more flexible for us to make the decisions at that point. That's basically...
Yeah, that's correct. So previously it said proposed new flood models. However, we've got an existing flood model, and so should that review on model noise and any other implementation matters that we're looking at mean that we can
do it sooner and do it on the current flood model, then certainly we don't want to say just the new flood models. We want to be able to look at the current ones as well.
Follow that? Yeah. Happy with that still? So moved by Councillor Jones, second by Councillor O'Neill.
Chair, if I can just say the workshop that the officers held on the flood modelling was absolutely fantastic. Both Councillor, what's your name? Taylor. It's a big night, it's a big night. No, we both really appreciated it, and it was explained extremely well to us lay people, and yeah, it was really fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Toleration. We've even come up with a new word. How good's that? All right, Councillor Jones, did you want to speak to that?
Close by agreeing with Councillor Young and Councillor O'Neill. The workshops were actually really beneficial, and I think what is really important for both the residents and the industry to understand is that the level of accuracy that this modelling is based on is far better than what we've had previously, and the fundamental reason for us doing this is to make sure wherever possible people's residences and businesses are actually protected from flood water. So it's not, I know the previous modelling changes have impacted on people's development rights, and they've felt that they've been unfairly dealt with, but at the end of the day this is about making sure that we're protecting where people live and where they work and doing it as accurately as possible. So I think it's a great body of work, and well done, Ryan and your team.
Okay, anyone else want to speak for? Oh no, that was closing. We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 9, Councillor Pauline Young, did you want to make a declaration and depart? Is that what's happening?
I'm not sure on it, and I'll take your advice as do I need to keep making a declaration? Or
Do you want to leave? But you want to leave the room?
Yes.
Then if you're going to leave the room, it's best that you make the declaration to advise on the record why that is.
So it's the same declaration?
It's the same declaration for the Old Burleigh Theatre Arcade, or the TLPI over that. It should be up there. That's correct, yeah. So So the name of the related party is Adam Young. He's the nature of the relationship is he's my brother, and the nature of the related party's interest is that he is the managing agent, current managing agent for the Old Burleigh Theatre Arcade, and so I plan to leave the room.
Thank you. So just if you can just go back up to that. So brother is the current managing agent. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, but just on that, it's a declarable, not a prescribed. Yep, you've got that. Good.
Councillor Jones.
So I just had a question in regards to my understanding is that the temporary protection will be in place for a 2-year period. Is that correct? And so we've clearly had a previous approval that hasn't been enacted yet, but I'm assuming that when work starts on that project or that site, the future need of the protection order may then not be required?
Do you want to answer that? I'll resist the urge to answer.
Yeah, thanks.
Through the chair, so the previous DA was approved based on the current TLPI that is due to expire at the end of this month. So that's still going to be the TLPI that protects it. This TLPI just protects it from them putting in another application or doing a change, because if there's no TLPI in place, they can go and demolish it without.
Yeah, which we don't want them to
do. But is the TLPI not necessary in the event that the development is realised? So is it the case that you will just simply recommend the expiration of this in 2 years' time should the building be built, or would you be expecting that we would incorporate the provisions within the city plan at some point?
Through the chair, the Heritage Code amendments, which came to council not that long ago, are the ones that are going to be amending the city plan. And the protections that are currently afforded by the TLPI to the Old Burleigh Arcade will be protected to all our heritage sites. So instead of just protecting the one site, we're going to protect all 84 with the same level of protection.
Thank you for answering the question.
Thank you. Right, any other questions? Someone like to... Councillor Gates, you want to move that one?
No, thank you. I was just going to ask if I could have, to refresh my memory, a list of the sites, please, that includes.
Someone like to move it? No, thank you. I'll move it. Someone like to second it? Councillor O'Neill? I don't think I need to speak to it. It's fairly self-explanatory. Saving the Gold Coast one heritage building at a time. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right. Can someone ask Councillor Young to return? Sorry? Yeah. Thank you. Right, councillors, that's the conclusion of the listed agenda items. Was there any items of general business? Councillor Patterson?
We've got the breweries. So while the item will come up.
Councillor Patterson was hoping to float with committee the concept of doing some revision of the Southport Pda. So you had some wording that you'd prepared.
That's right. So
obviously you're not a member of the committee, so if we could get the wording up and then someone might contemplate whether it's...
So this committee did... we did have a PDA resolution, but working with the director, I've got some guidance around just tightening that so it's easier for them to do the work on that PDA review. So sorry.
Well, this is purely from Councillor Patterson's perspective as a local councillor. I think it's something that she would like us to embark on, but perhaps, Director, can you just refresh our memories on what we had previously resolved?
So through you, Mr Chair, it was a GB back in October 2020, which related to reviewing the PDA, but it was quite broad. Obviously with the workload that we've had on at the moment, that work hasn't progressed. In speaking with Councillor Patterson, what this resolution does, which what we're trying to do is retire the old resolution and have this new resolutions which specifically focuses on some parts. From that point then we will have to assess it and work out where it does fit into our work program with the current workloads.
Chairman, just continuing on from that, is it the officer's view that the PDA requires review?
Through you, Mr Chair, we did do a review. I don't know if Richard or Catherine can, some time ago, it was a few years back. We're happy to have a look at it. I think with the entertainment precinct that's gone up today, we've made some amendments with the microbreweries and uses like that as well. It certainly doesn't hurt. I just wouldn't say it would be high on our priority list right now while we finalise these big packages of amendments and things. Was it 2016, Rich, or 20? Put Richard on the spot there.
Through the chair, we did an internal review a few years ago, which was really just looking at the precincts, the implementation experience from city development as well, just in terms of, you usually review these things probably every 5 to 10 years. So it was just that issue about, well, let's have a look at it. We did a bit of work back then on it, but we didn't progress it anywhere. So there is some work that was done quite a few years ago. We could pick that up and have a look at it and look at it under current circumstances as well, because of course there's another probably 4 years of experience in the precinct and, you know, have a look at contemporary changes in development and what we could do with the instrument. So, yeah.
So maybe we're better off to just do, say, a version of paragraph 2, which says that a report be brought back, which addresses the process and timing.
Mr. Chair, do you want to add in scope into that?
Yeah.
So maybe
Do you know
scope,
what I mean?
process,
because
and timing.
really, I think a short report.
And fun.
Do you think a short report would be within your
Do that.
realms of possibility? If we get something, Councillor Patterson, that just frames up
That'd be great.
what the content is and how we could go about it, then we could make some more informed decisions into the future. So maybe delete paragraph 1, take out as indicated in recommendation 1 from the very end.
And Chairman, just adding to that, given that it comes under the State's Economic Development Act, what would be their position on a review? And what would be their involvement in the review? Because it's not just ours to call, given it's the state's priority development area under the Economic Development Act. It's not part of our planning scheme.
Yep, through the chair. So that's correct. So we would speak with Economic Development Queensland. Effectively, the minister declared the PDA and signs off on the development scheme. So certainly we would go back to EDQ, work with them, much like we are with the entertainment precinct. So we've been working with the state on that as well. But there are some outstanding conditions when the instrument was put in place originally. Relating to the infrastructure plan for that area. So there's a number of facets that we could look at with this work. But yeah, we'll talk to EDQ about that as well.
Okay, so I'm in agreement with you, Chairman, that we should get a memo that outlines what would be required and how it might be slotted into the very heavy workload of the officers at this point in time.
Because then the other thing is, like, just limiting that question to the question of height might just be a straight no. It doesn't need to be done. And that would just finish that. Whereas I think we're all invested in Southport being a successful CBD and precinct. So, Councillor Owen Jones.
Great.
So I'd be supportive of it, but I'd be interested in the report also exploring resources and funding. And I'm happy to add those words. So, because I think that it's important that we, like when we commit staff resources to do a particular thing, it either has to be outsourced or taken away from other things that are already in progress. And likewise, if it's going to be outsourced, we need to know what those dollars might be. And then this is just in regards to the Southport PDA. But we've got 2 PDAs in effectively Southport, because we've also got the Health and Knowledge PDA. Is there a timeline in regards to that PDA? Are they both open-ended? I can't recall.
No, there's no sort of sunset clause that I'm aware of on either of those PDAs. Essentially, the Health and Knowledge Precinct PDA is administered by EDQ, whereas we're a delegate and effectively administering the Southport priority development area. So I think as a delegate, in reviewing an instrument, the council could seek to do that to EDQ.
So my understanding of what we're proposing today is effectively a report that would say, if we wanted to review the Southport PDA, the CBD PDA, this is what it might cost and look like and the timeline that may be involved. And that there may be a couple of options that come out of that. One may be to actually review the whole PDA and look to tinker elements within the PDA, or a bigger issue might be to actually say it's time to bring the PDA, or request to bring the PDA back into the scheme. And that to me is just like a scoping type of report that we're going to receive. I don't know whether or not there's any advantage to also to actually be thinking about both of the Southport PDAs in that regards, because the original intention of the Health and Knowledge Precinct PDA, in my mind, was to effectively enable the state to move relatively in their own style into delivering the Commonwealth Games village. But I don't know if we're going to go through the process of doing the report, whether or not we need to be giving some consideration as to whether or not how we feel about having two instruments outside of our planning scheme operating.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Jones, I think through this process in doing this report, we'd consult with EDQ at that point in time as well. So we're happy to have the conversation with them about the Health and Knowledge Precinct PDA, whether you want to add the words specifically in there. It might just maybe some implications of, if we are doing the Southport PDA, what are the implications of that on the Health and Knowledge Precinct?
Yep. Through the Chair, my take on it is the state government aren't going to give up Health and Knowledge Precinct. They're not going to give up their control over it, whereas we do have far more control and over the Southport PDA. So I think it would just potentially be creating more work on something that we're really not going to have any say over, health and knowledge.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on that?
Just a PDA,
Yes.
isn't
Yeah. No, it's the development scheme is the regulatory instrument that sits inside the priority development area. So the development scheme is the instrument we'd be reviewing.
Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, priority development area. But when we do that, we can also look at just the contextual considerations around a PDA and a city plan as well.
Okay, that's good. Happy to move that. Someone, Councillor Jones, you want to go second on that? Great. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Councillor McDonald, did I see your hand up?
It's about heights and related to stories. And I noticed that in item number 6 for the Southport Entertainment Precinct, it's got in here about up to 32 metres, 8 stories. But what we're seeing in those meterages, there's more than the stories that it's related. So is this 8 stories in brackets? Can they only go to 8 stories and 32 metres in height?
Do you know where that reference is,
Yeah,
Richard?
on page 458. It's just that, you know, and I think everybody else is finding it too, is that we've got height.
What? Oh yeah, no, please go. That's not. that's not for that reason. That's for another reason.
Sorry, Councillor.
I think we'll be done shortly. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, through the chair. Okay, so the context there is for a setback. So when you look at it, it's saying, well, the 4 metres for the setback will apply
Yeah,
up to 32 metres.
Setbacks. I'm talking. It's just an example that we're talking about.
Yep, so they're given 2 parameters there. So it's up to 32 metres or 8 stories. So,
Yeah.
yep.
But what I'm saying is that, you know, it was a calculation. It was to relate to stories when it was converted back in 2018. You know, for instance, 6 stories was to be 26 metres, 7 stories, 29 metres. And I know with the 29 metres, we're actually getting 9 stories. So, you know, is there any look at coming back and revisiting that to make it better than what it is? Because it was supposed to be, I think the conversion was 3.5 metres per story, but, you know, we're just not getting that.
So, through you, Mr Chair, Councillor McDonald, I'm pretty sure, Rich and Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Major Amendment 2 and 3, we're going back to the metres. Is that, for the bulk of it, Catherine, is that right?
Don't run, Catherine, there's no rush.
No urgency.
I don't want you to do an ankle or something.
Yes, through the chair, that is correct. Through Major Update 2 and 3, we are removing the stories designation out of City Plan except for the Spit Master Plan, which was actually a condition of the Minister's approval. But being that the development scheme operates outside City Plan, that would be, it is as it's currently detailed, so it details metres and stories.
But Councillor McDonald, the amount of, in the 2016 scheme prior to those amendments, the amount of references to stories were very limited anyway. So once you got above...
When it was converted,
yeah,
it was to relate to the actual stories. So, say for instance, in Palm Beach, it was 7 stories.
Yeah.
But now, and it was converted to 29 metres.
Yeah.
But now what we're seeing, it's not 7 stories, we're getting 9 stories.
Yeah.
And that conversion to metres from stories was to relate to the number of stories, and that's not happening.
I think, as I recall, that was just to give some, pictorial indication of the style of building we would get. And I think as long as we're being consistent and we've adopted 29 metres so everyone knows what that is now, I think we just have to stick to that. I wouldn't want to see 7-storey buildings with a reference to 7 stories where they start popping up to 35. I don't think the community would want... I think now the community understands what 29 metres is and they wouldn't want to see that exceeded by 7-storey buildings.
Yeah, what I'm, and I'll repeat again, when these conversions were made, they were to be converted as per the stories were at that time, and 7 stories wasn't 29 metres, it was much less. I think at 3.5, it was about 24.5 metres is related to a 7-storey building. And at the time, as you recall, there was a lot of discussion about the actual conversion in meterage to stories. But what we're seeing now, those conversions that took place, that 29 metres was supposed to relate to 7 stories. But what I'm saying, 29 metres, what we're seeing now is 9 stories. And you'll see all these conversions that they're much higher than what they were supposed to be converted from in the stories.
Just on that, Mr Chair, Councillor McDonald, I think when that is happening though, we'll see instances like today where the Palm Beach one does come, and in that case it was the basement that was flipping it into that 5 stories. So are you referring to the fact sheet that we put out with one of the first rounds of the amendments as well? Remember there was that fact sheet that had the colours with the...
and it was on our confidential pages back in 2018.
So, sorry, through the chair, City Plan also doesn't mandate a floor to ceiling height. That's covered under the building code. So while City Plan says it's 29 metres, it still has to meet the building code requirements in terms of ceiling to floor height. And that does vary depending on the use. So if you've got a retail or commercial use at the bottom and then you've got residential above, the 29 metres actually allows that bit of flexibility so that you can get varying floor heights, which is why we're also not allowed to put a ceiling height in City Plan because it's covered by the building code.
Okay, any other items of general business? Councillor Owen Jones... probably not going to make it back for this closing of the meeting. That's okay. So meeting closed at 11:09. Thank you all. What?
Queensland, yeah.